folks, my name is Rob, welcome back to another F1 fantasy video. Today I've got a bit of a special one for you guys. Wanted to take a look at my approach to chips for the remainder of the season. We're obviously over halfway through now, getting to the pointy end of the fantasy year, and I know there's quite a number of you who are watching this that probably haven't used all of or any of your chips for that matter. So I wanted to map out, I guess, an approach I have to the remainder of the year, optimal times you could use the chips, and I guess what that means for our teams for the remaining 7, 8, 9 races left on the calendar. So as always, if you're new around here and you're enjoying the content, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel. So I've got the calendar up here, very much a kind of a mind map of where I want to utilize these chips for the remainder of the season. I've used 2 already, and following Monza, where a lot of people activated Limitless, I wanted to pull this together and kind of plan out some times I'm thinking about using the remaining chips I have myself. For those of you who haven't followed me along from the beginning of the season, I used the final fix in Monaco, as you can see here, top left of the calendar. Extra DRS boost in Austria, and then haven't used any chips since. I know with 8 races left on the calendar, a lot of people have 3, 4, 5 chips up their sleeve. So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of movement and rapid adjustments to all kind of scenarios as we get into the latter stages of the year. But before we get into, I guess, my thought dump on when I want to use some of these chips, I did put out a survey, a poll on Twitter after the Monza Grand Prix, and I've got it up on my screen here. I guess the overall attack plan and kind of how people have used these chips so far, what their ranks are, and kind of what this means for your teams into the future. So as I pointed out, final fix in Monaco, extra DRS in Austria, and a lot of people's ranks have drastically changed in this period of time, certainly since I used my first one in Monaco. The majority of the respondents on the poll said that they have 3 to 4 chips left up their sleeve. I think that's kind of pretty consistent with the people I've been speaking to in the F1 fantasy community. There are some that have kind of used them all up from the outset, or most of them up. So they're obviously the ones watching their back as we approach the end of the season. And then there are some that have played a pretty idle kind of fantasy approach, fantasy game so far this season. So I fully expect a lot of those guys sitting kind of outside the top 50, outside the top 100K, to make some serious traction heading into the last few races. But again, there isn't really much to worry about if you're sitting outside the top 200, 300, 500K. I think there's plenty of decent optimal opportunities to use these chips, and we'll get into them shortly. But I wanted to just go through a few of you guys who did take the time to respond to this tweet, and for those of you who are watching and did respond, very much appreciate you engaging with this, I guess, questionnaire of sorts. So I think as we go down the list, I've asked for ranks as well to provide some context as to where people stand with respect to the chips they've used as well. A lot of will find those who have used more of the chips are probably going to be sitting inside the top kind of 10,000, top 1,000 in some cases. Those that haven't used as many are probably sitting a little bit further back. But again, no real worry. I don't think you need to stress. And we'll go through a few different examples we've got here. A good one for those people that haven't used many chips, a good example here is Mike. He's only used 1. But is still inside kind of the top 50,000, and I think that's a pretty decent position for someone who's only used Final Fix, which for me didn't really add a lot of value. I used it in Monaco. I think it was net 0 for my team, but I think if you've obviously used it at a more optimal time, then I think, you know, potentially you can make some benefit of it. I think though that chip specifically is team dependent, and I'll get more onto that when we go onto the calendar, which we just had up before. But I think that isn't really something you can say with any certainty you're going to use it at a set race, because it very much depends on how a certain driver in your team is expected to qualify and whether or not you expect they're going to lose positions, for instance, on the Sunday. So I think Mike's obviously used only 1, 26,000 overall, so very well placed for the last few races of the season. No chips from my friend here, but another really good rank, 2,000. This fellow Kapil, he's 105th overall, but only has wildcard and autopilot left. Wildcard doesn't quite have the same, I guess, implications or impact onto your team that you might find from a limitless or an extra DRS. It's more, I think, for me at least, how I'll use it is if I'm trying to get 3 drivers that I think are likely to win the race. The following week, I'll get them in on wildcard. For instance, that could be Verstappen, Leclerc, and say George Russell, for instance. I'll get all of them into my team, set me up for the following week, and then use autopilot with the expectation I think one of those 3 would win the race. So I think we're going to see a few more as we go down the list that are quite low. When I say low, like quite close to the number 1 overall ranking, but you'll find that a lot of their chips are already exhausted. Let's find another one. 378, 3 chips left. Really, really good position to be in, I think. Again, a lot of these big chips that have already been used, limitless, extra DRS, are the ones that are going to give you those bigger rank swings. So using the probably the less effective ones, such as Final Fix, No Negative, Autopilot, are going to be probably what maybe solidifies your ranking rather than gives you huge gains on those ahead of you. Okay, what else have we got? Limitless, clearly a lot of people that were on Limitless did quite well at Monza. Really happy for you guys. I decided to save it for a sprint race and I have no regrets at the moment, but that might change once we have the outcome known of the sprint race I use it on. Yeah, two heavy hitters in terms of chips here. Top 5,000, really good result. 3 left, Limitless, Final Fix, extra DRS used here for Joe. Overall 292, another sensational rank. Yeah, a lot of people I'm finding that are quite high up are using those Limitless and extra DRS. Also, I mean, obviously they've used them very well. So I think, don't be too impatient if you're worried that you're sitting quite outside the top 50, for instance. John's here, top 170 overall, but he hasn't used any chips. I definitely think that'll be a far cry come the end of the season. Could very well be inside the top 25k if you use them all effectively. So look, I'm not going to go through all of these, but again, very much appreciate all of you guys that did make it into this tweet and provided me with some, I guess, useful commentary, because I just want to reassure you guys that for those of you that might be a little bit behind the pack, there's no real reason to panic. There's plenty of time, plenty of racing, and plenty of opportunities to use those chips. So get using them, and I think this segues quite nicely into this next section of the video where I want to take a look at obviously all of the different circuits on the calendar remaining. So pointed out at the start, Monaco and Austria were the 2 races I used my 2 chips at. Haven't used anything since then, but I have had my eye on Singapore since very early in the season because of the fact that it is a street circuit. We know street circuits do have a tendency for a higher rate of DNFs. Keeping in mind that this season we haven't seen quite as many as we're accustomed to. Cars seem to be a little bit more reliable, certainly those in the top kind of 4 or 5 teams. And I think, even though we do have 3 rookies on the grid, we've got a very competent one in Oscar Piastri, and then obviously Sargent and Lawson as well. So I think that's street circuits generally going to be quite tricky for rookie drivers to navigate. I don't believe Lawson especially has driven at this circuit before. I could be wrong, but at least I believe I heard that on one of the well-known podcasts in the F1 community. So yeah, I think Singapore, really optimal time for me to think about using it here. There's also a chance of rain. I know it's 14 days or so away from when this next race kicks off. But if it is forecast for rain and we're at a street circuit, I can't really think of a better time to use it. Sprint races for me are an absolute no-go for activating the no negative, because points you might score on Saturday would offset those on Sunday if you DNF'd, and vice versa. So that takes 3 races out of the equation in Qatar, Circuit of the Americas, and Brazil. So that really leaves Vegas, Mexico, Japan, and Abu Dhabi for other no negative opportunities. I don't expect there's going to be any rain in Abu Dhabi, probably very much the same in Vegas. So that really leaves Japan. We did have some wet weather there last year. So that's a very possible opportunity to use it. But if I find there's going to be rain at Singapore forecast, I'm not even going to hesitate. So that's kind of when I'm expecting to use that chip there. Japan, Qatar, I think the next two chips I've got lined up could also mirror when I want to activate them in Circuit of the Americas and at Mexico. So we've got here in blue the Limitless chip, another sprint race, and I've been toing and froing over using this chip at either Qatar or at Circuit of the Americas. Qatar, obviously, because it has a very, very low chance of rain given it's in the Middle East. And then Circuit of the Americas, the reason why I'm perhaps leaning to it a little bit more now is just because we have seen over the years, obviously, a lot of the drivers on the grid are familiar with the track. Qatar, on the other hand, not so much. And we've seen Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes all have excellent races there in the last few years. So it is encouraging for me to want to pile in on those assets then. I also think by the time we get to Coda, that there may well be that extra race that gives, say, Mercedes, for instance, which is a team I'm eyeing off tripling up on for the wild card just because they're all very low owned, an opportunity to further develop more of the upgrades to the car. I'm not suggesting one extra race is going to make a world of difference, but it's very possible they bring another kind of round of upgrades later in the season, or maybe one race beyond, say, Qatar, for instance, at a track, like I said, that they are familiar with. So that's a distinct possibility for me there. And then I roll into the wild card. And the reason why I was thinking about doing a wild card at Mexico was for the reasons mentioned before, where I would set my team up the week before, where I'm able to bring in Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell, for instance, or Sainz, Hamilton, Verstappen, whatever it might be. Try and get the most out of the autopilot chip the following week. And I guess the reason for the autopilot is just because it will defer to whatever driver you scores the highest in your team that week. So I'm trying to really maximize the possibility of getting as much out of the drivers that I have in my team at that point in time. You can't activate two chips in the same week, so that's why I would consider doing something like that the week before, rolling it into the following week for autopilot. That's kind of where my head's at now, and Brazil is obviously also a sprint race, so it means there's more, I guess, points on the table, and not to mention that Brazil sometimes does get a bit of rain as well. So it would mean that if for instance, I had Max in my team, he's my standard DRS boost, and he DNF'd, that would also mean that I wouldn't get his points. I get the highest points of, say, Russell or Leclerc, for instance, that were also in my team that week. So I think that really covers a lot of different bases. Again, I haven't absolutely set my heart on going for Brazil. I could well do it into Qatar for the autopilot and use the wild card in Japan. But I think leaving a few of my chips later in the season, understanding where my rank sits, gives me a bit more time to adjudge what drivers and constructors I want in my team for those races and where I can really extract the most value from those chips at that point in time. As far as Vegas is concerned, no one's raced there before. Obviously a lot of straights. I think Red Bull and Ferrari with their straight line speed should excel there. But again, because it's a non-sprint race weekend, and I think the race is at 11 p.m. local or track time, so not something I'm overly excited about. I think most drivers might well be pretty tired by the time that rolls around. And then Abu Dhabi have pretty much no intention of using any chips there either. I might take a punt on a differential driver for the last race, but I don't think I'm going to really activate any other chips then. So, and then final fix I've got at the bottom here, team specific. If I can get my words out, I think that, again, as I said before earlier in the video, comes down to any drivers you have in your team that might qualify quite well and then expect they'll regress in the race. Alex Albon's a great example right now where he's doing really well in that Williams, could really put himself around. I mean, he was in P4 a couple of weeks ago, could really qualify quite highly, lose positions on Sunday. I mean, the Williams is rapid in a straight line, we all know that. But if you do want to mitigate the possible risk of a DNF or Albon going quite far back in the field, more than you might expect, then I think Final Fix would be a great time to use that on him. But I've used mine, so I can't really talk to that too much. And then for those of you that haven't used, say extra DRS, I would definitely use that on a sprint. You could also save it for a time when, say, Max has a grid penalty. If you can time that with a sprint race, that would be the optimal time, because if he has that grid penalty, maximizing the opportunity for positions gained and overtakes. So that's kind of a thought download, a very hopefully brief video by the time this wraps up, but just wanted to revisit the chip strategy one more time before the end of the season, because I know we've only got a handful of races or so left on the calendar, and I imagine a lot of you that haven't already used most of your chips are certainly looking at times to do so. So if you enjoy the video, please do like it, subscribe to the channel. It goes a very long way for helping me and this channel grow and move into the future. And do stay tuned. I'll be back hopefully with one more video before the race week, so tune into that then. But in the meantime, have a great rest of your week, guys, and I'll see you all very soon.